In the story of the Exodus, God rescues his people out of slavery, pulling them from the crushing weight of oppression and leading them towards something entirely new, a promised land, a distant garden filled with abundance, life, and rest. It's the kind of place that echoes the very beginning of the Bible, a return to what humanity was always meant to experience. But here's the part that feels unexpected. God doesn't take Israel there directly. Instead of the shortest path, instead of the most efficient route, he leads them the long way, straight into a harsh, dry, and unforgiving wilderness. And that raises a question that lingers beneath the surface of the story. Why the wilderness at all? Why not take them straight from slavery into blessing? It's a good question, and to understand the answer, we need to step back and explore a deeper theme that runs all throughout the Bible, the theme of the wilderness. Because the wilderness isn't just a place. It's a pattern, something that shows up again and again in the story of humanity. If you go all the way back to the beginning, the Bible opens not with a garden, but with a kind of wilderness, an empty, unformed, lifeless world. There's no structure, no abundance, no life thriving yet. It's raw, untamed, and waiting, and then God steps in. He brings life where there was none. Water flows up out of the ground, and from that source God plants a garden, a place overflowing with life, beauty, and provision. A place where everything is sustained by His presence. Then comes humanity. But here's something subtle and important. Humans are not formed from the garden. They're formed from the dust of the wilderness, from the dry ground outside, and then God places them into the garden. It's like humanity is brought from a place of emptiness into a place of fullness, invited into a life that depends entirely on staying connected to God. But that connection requires something: trust. To live in the garden, humans have to listen to God's voice. They have to trust that His way leads to life, and that's where the tension enters, because there's another voice in the garden, a voice that whispers something different, something deceptive. It says God can't really be trusted. It feels like He's holding something back from you. You could take control. You could define life on your own terms, and instead of holding on to God's voice, the humans listen to that one, and the result is immediate and tragic. They lose the garden. They're sent back out into the wilderness. So now the wilderness takes on a new meaning. It's no longer just the setting before the garden. It becomes the symbol of what happens when humanity is disconnected from God's life. It represents exile, distance, survival without the source of life. And from that moment on, the wilderness becomes a recurring space in the biblical story. Different people end up there for different reasons. Sometimes it's because of their own failure. Take Moses, for example. Before he becomes the great leader of Israel, he makes a devastating mistake. He kills an Egyptian. And because of that, he has to run. He flees into the wilderness, leaving everything behind. But sometimes people end up in the wilderness, not because of their own choices, but because of the brokenness of others. Like Hagar, she's mistreated, abused, and pushed out. She doesn't choose the wilderness, it's forced upon her. And yet in both stories, something remarkable happens. God meets them there, in the middle of isolation, in the middle of uncertainty, in the middle of survival. God shows up. He meets Hagar beside a well, providing water and speaking a promise over her future, a future that stretches beyond her current suffering. And he meets Moses in a burning bush, right there in the wilderness, calling him into purpose and preparing him for something far greater than he imagined. So the wilderness, as harsh as it is, becomes more than just a place of loss. It becomes a place of encounter, a place where God meets people in their need, which brings us back to Israel. When God delivers them from slavery in Egypt, He's not just rescuing them physically, He's inviting them into a completely new way of living. But there's a problem. They've been shaped by slavery. Their instincts, their fears, their mindset, it's all been formed in a system where survival depended on control, fear and oppression. They're free, but they're not yet ready. So instead of leading them straight into the promised land, God leads them into the wilderness, not as punishment, but as preparation, because the wilderness exposes things. It strips away distractions. It removes illusions of control. It brings people face to face with their dependence. Out there, survival isn't guaranteed by systems or strength. It depends on God, and that's exactly what he begins to teach them. Each day, he provides just enough, not an abundance they can store up and rely on, not a surplus that makes them feel self-sufficient, just enough for today, and that's intentional, because God is training them to trust him daily, to wake up each morning and believe that he will provide again, to listen to his voice, to follow his guidance. In a way, he's teaching them how to live like they were meant to live in the garden, because the key to surviving in the wilderness is actually the same as the key to thriving in the garden. Staying connected to God, listening, trusting, depending. The wilderness becomes a training ground, a place to practice being. Garden people in a place that feels nothing like a garden. But the reality is, it's hard. The pressure of the wilderness reveals what's really inside them, and for many of them, it's too much. They complain, they doubt, they resist. Some even say they want to go back to Egypt, back to slavery, because at least there, life felt predictable, and because of that, many never make it into the promised land. They remain in the wilderness. But the next generation, the ones who grow up in that environment, who are shaped by daily dependence on God, they become ready. They learn the rhythm of trust. They learn to follow. And eventually, they step into the land that was promised. At first, everything seems right. Their trust is strong. Their connection to God feels real. But over time, something begins to shift. They start to look at the land, the abundance, the success, the stability, and they begin to believe something dangerous, that it came from them, their effort, their wisdom, their strength, or worse, they start attributing it to other gods. They forget the one who brought them there, and slowly, the same pattern repeats: disconnection, idolatry, injustice, and eventually exile. They're driven out of the land and back into the wilderness. So at this point, the story feels almost heavy. Humanity fails in the garden, and we fail in the wilderness too. No matter the environment, something in us keeps drifting away from God. But the story doesn't end there, because God doesn't abandon his purpose. He's still committed to bringing humanity back into life, to restore that connection that was lost. And so, he enters the wilderness again, but this time in a completely new way. In the person of Jesus, early in his life, Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days, and this moment is deeply intentional. It mirrors Israel's 40 years. It echoes the human story. He faces hunger, weakness, and isolation, and then comes the familiar voice, the deceiver, offering shortcuts, power without trust, provision without dependence on God. The same kind of temptation humanity has always faced. Take control. Do it your own way. You don't need to trust. But this time, something is different. Where Israel failed, where humanity failed, Jesus remains faithful. He listens to God's voice. He trusts completely. He refuses to grasp for control. And in doing that, he shows what it looks like to truly live connected to God, even in the wilderness. And then he steps out of that wilderness and begins his mission, announcing that God's kingdom is here, that life is being restored, and everywhere he goes, he brings signs of that life. He heals the sick, feeds the hungry, restores the broken. Sometimes, even in literal wilderness places, it's like glimpses of the garden are breaking into the world again. And he invites people to follow him, to listen to his voice, to trust him, to begin living this new kind of life even before everything is fully restored. And then, through his death and resurrection, he does something even greater. He opens the way forward, not just back to the garden, but into a future where that life is fully restored forever. But here's where we are now. We're not there, yet we're somewhere in between, in a way. We're like Israel in the wilderness. The world can feel harsh, uncertain, even disorienting at times. We experience need, waiting, testing, but we're not alone in it, because Jesus promises to be with us here, not always giving us everything we want, but faithfully giving us what we need. And in this space, just like before, we're being formed, invited to trust, invited to listen, invited to follow, to become the kind of people who can live in the fullness of what God has prepared. So the wilderness isn't just something to escape. It's a place where something important happens. It's where trust is built, where dependence grows, where we learn day by day to stay connected to the source of life. It's where we practice being garden people, even when we're not in the garden yet.